Welcome to a second edition of Sharpe Takes, and I am delighted to have as my guests the Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association, Sue Ceglowski. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
And Flor Diaz-Smith, who is the Chairman of the Board of the Vermont School Boards Association. So welcome to the show, and I'm looking forward to discussion on education in Vermont and how we might do a better job and where we're at now, where we want to go to, how we get there, and how we're going to pay for it. Those fundamental scope of, can't cover it all today, but we can get started. So welcome, and Sue, why don't you start us out with a little perspective on Vermont education's situation at the moment.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, and it's really a privilege to be on the show with you today. Where we are, I think, is we have a high-quality education system in Vermont, and we have some challenges as far as how much it costs us. We know that there were many school budgets that did not pass last spring and needed to be voted on multiple times by the taxpayers. And so we're at a crossroads here where we're trying to look at where we are, where we want to go, and how we are going to get there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And comments from you, Flor?
Thank you first for having us here today. It's like a unique opportunity for us to just talk to our old citizens, right, at a level that we can. Education is in such a pivotal time right now in Vermont, public education, that is. So I would like to emphasize that, the shared responsibility that we all have, because education is the foundation of our democracy, not just in Vermont, but in the country. So we're at that pivotal time because there is so many things coming into play, and it's not either or. It's not either paying for a quality education or the taxes being lower, right? We all are taxpayers. So all school board members are taxpayers too. So I keep saying it's not either or, because we all have to continue to focus on quality, sustainability, and equity as we look at public education. So today where we are is like, this is where we are, the conditions that we are now in. We can't start pointing fingers at each other. It's like, let's focus on being solution oriented and the challenges that we have, so that we can approach with a solution oriented mindset our shared responsibility to uphold the values of public education for all our children, right?
Yeah.
And for the future of Vermont.
Education system. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So in that regard, looking forward, Acts 46 passed, and there were protections in there for small schools. What happened in this county was the superintendents moved towards closing small elementary schools, and there was massive pushback from local communities, feeling that would destroy their communities if the local school was closed. This report that I have on my desk here, the state is obviously looking towards consolidation and closing of schools. Is it time, given that communities are loath to close their own schools, even if they are maybe too small, is it time for the state to step in and force some school closures, saying perhaps if you can't have 5 students per grade or 10 students per grade, then your school must close? Or if there's 2 elementary schools within 5 miles, that you have to close one of them? Is it time for the state to take that kind of action?
We have seen that it is very difficult to make those types of decisions at the local level, and when school boards do try to make those type of decisions, oftentimes there is significant pushback from communities. So it's a difficult decision to make at the local level, and I think it's going to be up to our lawmakers, who are going to be hearing from their constituents as to whether they decide to go in the direction of having more state requirements that would guide those local decisions.
If we're looking at the kids, our children, and delivering quality education to our children, what makes sense?
I think we, in my district, we're having those conversations, right? Small schools are the heart of our communities, right? And we have to, but we can level the sense of community on our kids, right? There's many ways to create community within our towns, right? Some towns are 6 miles apart, right? So we have to, if we stay student-centered, we can stay focused on quality, on equity, right? So then we're not talking about, I want to move away about talking away closing small schools, right? What is best for kids? So how do kids learn best, right? Like, is it a classroom of 3 preschoolers or 3 kindergartners where they will learn best? Would they have the opportunities that they need? Can we fulfill our requires of, without getting too jargony, of multi-layer system of supports, right? Can a teacher really are we duplicating services across towns that could very well serve better all of 6 kids together? Like we in Vermont, our scale is still, our small schools, even within some consolidated schools, will still be small schools, right? So how do we leverage student outcomes and our desire to have the best outcomes for kids?
Yeah.
And let's not talk about, like, I want to move away because it's like really sensitive for communities. I think there's many ways to approach it. I think it still should be approached by our communities, right? They want to have a say, and there's many ways that the commission right now is asking for input. So I don't know if that completely answers your question,
Yeah.
but it is
No.
it's the heart of communities, right? So we all understand that. At the same time, what do we want for our kids? How are we going to sustain best outcomes for our kids? How are we going to give them opportunities, whether that is for a career path, for college education, for we need our citizens coming back to Vermont.
Yeah, you refer to the quality of our education and the quality for our kids, and so I've heard recently that yes, we spend the 5th most per pupil, which is not the most. You would think with a lot of the chatter out there that we're spending way more than other states. In fact, we're number 5. And there's reports, depending on how you measure student outcomes, that we're 5th in the nation in terms of the quality of education for our students. So we're not outliers in a sense, and we're doing a pretty good job with our kids, it seems like. To talk a bit more about this notion of closing schools and regionalization, is it time for us to, one of the things that I've heard a lot about is that the demographic problems are really at the high school level, not at the elementary school level, and that you can accommodate or give quality education to children in a small elementary school setting. It's more difficult at the high school setting where you want to have AP calculus, and you want to have career and tech programs, and you want to have sports teams and whatnot. Is it time for us to think about maybe 1 high school per county, excepting Chittenden County, of course? But for the rest of us, is it time for us to think about having 1 high school per county?
I think it goes back to what Flor was just speaking about being student-centered and looking at the number of students in a county and the geography and the topography of that county, and what is the best way to offer the high quality opportunities that we want for our high school students in that county.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift a little bit to school boards, because that's where your focus is, on Vermont school boards. And I served for a short period of time on our local school board, found it pretty frustrating. I said fairly often, before I served, I said that serving on a school board is the most difficult volunteer job in the state. You have a pretty big responsibility. Even in our relatively small district, the the budget is over $30 million. That's a lot of money that you're responsible for, and the education of our children you're responsible for. And yet I felt there was very little training. There was pretty robust training on understanding what policy governance was about, but not about sort of the nuts and bolts of what school boards needed to do. Should the state school boards or the state get involved in funding or getting more directly involved in training school board members?
The Vermont School Boards Association, we are a nonprofit entity. We're a member association, so we provide a lot of resources to our members, who are the school board members throughout the state, and but we don't have the ability to require them to take any training. There is a requirement in the law for superintendents and board chairs to do 8 hours of training together annually. And we provide opportunities for them to do that, but there isn't a requirement in the law for all school board members to have a certain amount of training. There are other states that do have those type of requirements, but not all states require it. It's sort of a hodgepodge across the country.
How did you get your expertise in the school board?
I actually found the Vermont School Boards Association originally by accident, wanting to be educated, right? So, I've been part of the Vermont School Boards Association now, I can't even remember, like about 8 years. So I think it's vitally important for all school boards to be educated, and there's many ways to do that. I think we saw an increase of board members coming to our conference this year. Mm-hmm. We have Vermont Schools Association for the past few years with Sue's leadership and Sandra, and we have an excellent team at Vermont Schools Association. There's a lot of webinars, there's a lot of different education opportunities that you have as a board member that you can seek, and also that your superintendent, there's a partnership between superintendent and chairs, and there should be a responsibility for us to make sure that our board members are, we also should be learning all the time. It's a good example to set for the students. It's a good example, our leadership teams are, learning communities. We should be a learning community too. We're about to have all to comply with the governance standards that come into effect on July 2025. So that is going to be a great help. And basically, it's a lot of that governance, right? Without the governance understanding from our school board, sometimes we tend to try to micromanage instead of understanding our role, where we are 30,000 feet up, right? Like, we are making sure the conditions are there to create that beautiful garden for the kids to learn, but we don't get into the everyday, this teacher goes here. We're not
it's a delicate balance.
It's a delicate balance between asking the right questions, making sure that you're keeping accountability, you're making accountability be not scary, but have a growth mindset, right? Review data, monitor student outcomes, do that so that you make data-informed decisions, right? You look at your enrollment, you look at, opportunities for kids, but you don't get into the, who is higher, who's not higher. Our only higher is the superintendent, right?
Yeah.
So it is a delicate balance, but I think that there's a lot of opportunities in Vermont for that, and I think we see an increase of, we don't have all of the board members coming, right? But that's something that we can continue to work on.
According to your report that came out recently, the support from the state school board is and the agency isn't providing the kind of data that school boards can use to determine whether they're doing an effective job or not. So isn't that part of the problem?
Yes, I think that's a big piece of what that, we had a task force that worked on that report, and the origin of it was here in Addison County, based on a resolution that was put forth by the Addison Northwest School District Board. So we had a task force of 11 school board members. They were from all around the state, and they worked from last January through this September, to really get a lot of input from not only other school board members around the state, but also superintendents, special educators, curriculum leaders, principals, school business officials. So we solicited a wide range of input, and that was really the biggest piece of information that they kept hearing back from all these different entities was the need for data, and to have it be a system where it is consistent across the state, so that when you're looking at data from your district, you're able to compare it with data from other districts.
Yeah. And so recently, I read an article where the new, should I call her an interim secretary of the education, wants to be data-driven. And in looking through the documents provided by the Agency of Education and your documents, it seems to me that there's a different notion of what data they're talking about. The data that it seems to be coming out of the agency is all about cost per pupil and cost for transportation and cost for this, and how we need to have fewer schools so we can lower costs. And your document seems to be more driven towards finding what's quality education for children, and not so much about the cost of delivering that education. So how can we get to a point where we're getting the kind of data at the school board level that is actually useful in helping our children be more successful?
I think that, efforts like the task report, set that foundation for that collaboration, right? Like Sue was saying, having that comprehensive data. We collaborated with, the Agency of Education knows about that. They're working on that. Are we there yet? We're not there yet, right? But that's why we are here, to ask the right questions. And it's not just us, right? The Vermont Superintendents Association, the Principals Association, citizens. Like we would continue to ask for what we need in order to make those informed decisions. So the three things that the report asked, the comprehensive dashboard, enhancing the capacity at the agency to support our districts and us as school board members, and them helping to make sure that we are complying with ed quality standards too, are three things that I think moves us in the right direction, right? And it creates that collaboration. I think it is in our best interest, not just of us sitting here, but of the citizens sitting in right now listening to us, of the legislature, of every single member sitting in that commission, that we work together towards that vision, so that we don't just come out of whatever happens right now when the legislature comes together with the draconian cost cuts, cost containment, instead of having a vision, right? So it's in our best interest to not point fingers, right? Not point fingers, like let's allow everybody to do the work that they are supposed to be doing, and keep asking the right questions, right? We just recently sent a letter to the commission and said, there should be a push for this data, a collaborative letter, firm, but that is asking for the things that they need in order to make informed decisions. So I really feel like that's how there's a shared interest among every citizen in Vermont to have this be something that works for all of us, and not concentrating, like, if it's going to be somebody from the legislature that is going to come and have his name or her name or their name in the bill, right? Or is it going to be the Agency of Education's idea? Is it going to be, no, this has to be a collective effort in order to sustain the principles of public education and our democracy, right? So I think that's how we solve it. I know that sounds like a little too holistic, but I think that is where we are right now in our country and in Vermont. We have to have a collective responsibility.
We have hard decisions to make, and it won't be easy to get there.
And it won't be easy, and we're not all going to win, right? We're all going to have consensus, right? We're all going to have to do what is best for kids. Stay student-centered. There's no politics to be played here, and we have to do our best effort to keep the politics away from having a solution for public education, right?
So some of the ideas that are floating around out there is it time to the governor appointed a person as Secretary of Education who comes from a charter school background. Is it is it time for us to adopt some of those provisions in Vermont and have charter schools be part of Vermont? We essentially have them. We call them academies. Maybe we keep that name instead of using charter schools. Kind of has a bad taste in your mouth, right? So we'll call them academies, and we'll have them overseen publicly, and we won't tuition or voucher private schools that are not academies. Does that ring any bells? Is that a part of the discussion we should be having?
I think that was part of the discussion a couple of years ago for a bit in the legislature, and we do have a complicating factor with the U.S. Supreme Court decision Carson v. Macon, which said that if we provide tuition to private schools, then we also need to include religious schools. So that decision is something that will have to be complied with any type of approach that the legislature would take to that issue.
But that decision, in my view, seems to be contravene Vermont's Constitution.
Yes.
So that's why the notion, if we turn the academies into public type schools through the charter process, if you will, and then discontinue vouchering in all other aspects, then we can move beyond that Supreme Court decision. I don't know if that works or not, but that's a notion.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people working particularly in that lawsuit, and it is going to have an impact in Vermont. I want to stay like high level right now because I don't think the show is big enough, long enough right now for us to dive into the academy conversation, and I want to be sensitive to that. There's a lot of people having this conversation, right? But I think what we can acknowledge here is that public education is a public good. There's got to be accountability for the use of public funds across Vermont. Charter schools. So I'm not talking about academies. I'm talking about the question that you just asked, and I don't want to tie it to a person either. Just charter schools in general, because I don't think that it's fair to do that right now. So charter schools in general wouldn't be, or choice wouldn't be a good thing for Vermont. And the reason being is they exclude. They're not public. There's not the same accountability for the use of public funds. So it wouldn't. It doesn't represent Vermont values, right? Without even diving into it's against our own constitution, right? It just doesn't represent Vermont values. So I don't think it's in our best interest. It hasn't worked great in other states, and I think I'm a foreigner, right? I became a citizen to be a school board member because I know what it is to not have public education. I know what it is to not have rule of law, to not have a constant democracy, right? And I think we take it for granted, and I hope that we don't take it for granted, by allowing choice, right? It's not, we need to move away from that individual is just for, how it's just going to advance one student. It's all our kids. Right? Yeah. So if we stay centered in all our kids in Vermont, I don't think there is room for charter schools in Vermont. There's no room for choice. Public school might not be perfect. It's an experiment, just like our democracy, but we are all part of it, right? We all contribute to make it better. Like you said, being a board member, being the executive director of having to hold all school board members of Vermont, it is not an easy task, but I think it's a very important task in order to keep us center in what is important for our communities and what it is for the future of Vermont in this time, in the context that we are right now in our country. Right?
Yes, yeah. I think so. It's just that we have 91 school districts that are vouchering students right now, that have choice right now, that's in direct conflict with the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court decision. So we have to figure out what the heck we're going to do with that, and that's not an easy conversation.
It is not an easy conversation.
If I could switch just for a moment to maybe a conversation that over the last several years, Act 46 came into being, and then the special education law, which has not been fully implemented even today, I don't think, even though it was passed in 2018. More recently, what has been passed is a big change in student weighting. These things have sort of, you look at these three pieces together, they have sort of shifted the cost of education more heavily on schools in wealthy school districts, I think, where their tax rate under the new weights, their tax rates went way up as compared with my local school district was under 10% increase in tax bills. Is the student weighting appropriate the way it is, or some have suggested we should dial that back and go back to closer to the way the weights used to be?
The way the weights used to be was, I think, they were created through a political process and not through research or empirical data. And the new weights are created through empirical data. And so they should be much more accurate than the previous weights.
So we just have to figure out how this shift of cost from higher poverty districts to higher income districts is going to play out over the next several years.
And I think it goes back to the question: is that some our kids are our kids, or all our kids are our kids, right? So if we all share the responsibility for all the kids, and we, Act 127 was created with all this in mind. But it's one piece of data that we have to use to update our formula, right? To update, it's one piece of data that creates a vision of what we want for Vermont, but it's one piece of data that the commission is going to use right now to see, have we calibrated right the tax part? How are we calculating the tax? I'm not the taxes. I'm not questioning the weights. I know that there were some things that were not done exactly how the report came from Tammy, right? But it is a fair way to be able to provide the funds that we need for all our kids, right? So, again, we have a lot of things to not to fix, but to put together that inform whatever we're going to do right now. There's definitely, we need to do something. There's no question about it. We all agree that we need to do something, and it's not just focusing on Act 127 or just focusing on declining enrollment or just, it has to be comprehensive. It's all of the pieces, right? And yes, we all want an affordable Vermont. We don't want people to be deciding to move away. We have a lot of Vermont, the highest growing population is the, homelessness and 65 and older, right? So a lot of people in fixed incomes. So we can be, we have to be conscious about that, because they don't have extra money to pay for taxes. So it's rethinking, how do we pay for taxes? There are so many questions up right now in the air, and we have a collective responsibility to do something. It's and not in a scarcity mindset. We have so much. We have so many opportunities together. Let's get to work, and make it happen. We don't, no excuses, let's model for our kids. Let's just make it happen.
And I know that the School Boards Association does focus on a statewide view, and you'll be testifying in the legislature, I'm sure, on how we get there. The proposal that I've heard most recently is returning to a foundation formula for albeit a much more robust one than the last one. Still makes me a little worried that we're going to go back to property-rich communities being able to provide an inequitable education for some children. So I'm sure you'll be focused on those kinds of things. We only have a couple minutes left, but one thing being that my trade is being an auto mechanic and I taught in a tech center, I think one of the things that often gets left to the end, as we just did today, is how are we going to deal with career and technical education?
career technical education is one of my passions too. I'm an architect by trade, and I participate in the Vermont Career Center in Barrie, and I think it is just again not either or. It's an integrated part of how we serve our kids. It's an opportunity for all our kids, and there's been a lot of talk about making that part of our regional high schools, right? So we have sending districts to all of our career centers. Right now, a lot of our career centers can't take enough kids, right? Like just the Vermont Career Center in central Vermont, we couldn't take all of our kids this year. We send away almost 350 kids.
Oh, wow.
Right? So there is a huge opportunity, and we see career centers as an afterthought, like you say, and they are an integral part. Kids that go to career center not necessarily just all go to the trades. They can also go to college. Kids that are in our traditional high schools go to trades later on, right? And it's just we need to get rid of that bias with career. It's as important for Vermont to have kids going to a career center as it is to going to a high school. And they should be completely integrated, right?
Yes, especially since we need electricians and plumbers and carpenters and nurses and all those professions. We need those people, and it's hard to outsource those people to India. You can't get a plumber to fly over from India to fix your plumbing, so we need to develop those trades here in the state, and we're lagging behind, in my view, in terms of being able to do that for our children. So any final thoughts? We've got a minute left.
Just wondering whether you wish you were back in the legislature to solve all these problems.
Well, I have to say I miss it. Great colleagues, wonderful work. It was a big challenge, and I'm proud of my service there. But I'm ready to move on to new things, and this TV show is part of it. Being involved in community discussions and having some fresh thoughts and fresh ideas from our district. Anyway, we have a brand new legislator filling my shoes, going to the legislature, who's going to bring some new, fresh ideas, and I think that's a good thing.
That's great. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And that'd be it for episode 2. I look forward to more conversations regarding education in our state and how we can move forward. Thanks for listening.